Since we went the LSX, we've got 8.
That's because we're going to make 700 horsepower, right?
That's right.
Yeah. We can't go home unless we make 700 horsepower.
Sam's Garage is brought to you by Brothers Truck Parts.
I've been in your waters. I came for sure. I've never been so close before. It's one way or the other.
On this episode of Sam's Garage, Sam continues progress on the 1968 Buick Skylark with co-host Kevin Ford installing stainless steel headers using new ARP bolts, replacing the fuel pump and fuel tank, as well as installing new engine mounts. Sam will showcase some cool new products from DEI to protect your ride from those hot exhaust parts. Where we have the long-awaited Hudson Hornet project. Sam, with the help of Doug Harris, prepares the engine to be reunited with the chassis.
So with our LS Classic series, we use a crate GM motor. This gives us good sealing, but there's a few things that we like to upgrade on this vehicle with the ARP hardware. Anywhere we've got sealing or we need strength, we've gone through and changed them out to stainless ARP bolts. This will assure us all the quality that we need, and it looks a little better too, because we got nice shiny ends and stainless hardware.
What about the peace of mind? You know, when you have this much invested in a vehicle, in any project, you want to have some peace of mind so that you can actually enjoy your investment.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, you know, we've changed the water pumps, bolts. That's going to let us know that we're not going to have any leaks up there. Mm-hmm. We're going to use the header bolts, so we know we don't have any problems with, you know, leaks there either.
Yep, and we already got the torque converter, bell housing bolts, flywheel bolts, which are very important because we're making a bunch of horsepower, and we want peace of mind in that area for sure. That's right. So we're going to go ahead and grab our headers, install them, and it's important that you guys use ARP fasteners when it comes to the actual exhaust manifolds or bolts, even in your passenger vehicle on the road. If you guys are running an LS motor, 5.3 to 6.2, what happens is because there are so many heat cycles with the exhaust manifolds, the bolts always break. So if it were me, before they break, I'd just go ahead and replace them one by one with ARP. That way you got good peace of mind, because in the future, if something were to break, most likely the heads are going to have to come off, and it's going to cost a couple grand. We're going to be installing these headers, and we've already tested to make sure they fit because this is an engine swap, so you always want to make sure they fit. We got good clearance, everything fits perfect. We're going to have to do most of the work from the top, so we're going to put it up there, have one bolt holding it in place, and then we'll bring it down, put their gaskets in, finish up the hardware using ARP lube as an anti-seize.
Yeah, we don't want to gall these stainless bolts. Put them into an aluminum head especially.
And remember, anytime you guys are installing stainless steel on your car, whether it be headers, exhaust, whatever it may be, you want to make sure before you crank the car and introduce heat to the system that you completely wipe down all your fingerprints of any oil on the surface of the metal, because as soon as you turn it on and heat goes through it, it's going to burn that oil into the metal and stain it, and you can never get it out.
Yeah. Let's go down.
You know, Kevin, that couldn't have gone any smoother. We got 1 7/8 primaries, big headers, engine swap. Headers fit like nothing.
I've never had a set of headers go into a swap like this.
And we know that those bolts are going to last a long time. ARP does a great job of strength. And you guys, they come in different colors. They come in 12-point, they come in 6-point. We opted to go with the stainless steel because it matches the rest of our dress up on the engine.
Yeah, it matches all the other hardware we used on the bell housing and all the transmission accessory stuff there.
So we know that this engine is going to run good, make a lot of power, and it's going to stay together using ARP fasteners.
When we come back, Sam will showcase some new cool products to protect your ride from those hot exhaust parts. Welcome back to Sam's Garage, presented by Brothers Truck Parts. Sam's Garage is brought to you by these fine companies.
Let's face it, guys, engine swaps have been popular for decades, ever since the hot rods have been out. Today's engine swaps, with all the technology, makes it to where you guys can make it a very fast, high horsepower deal, and you could do it with a couple of buddies at home over a weekend. As you can see, this is a C10 67, and it's rocking an LT1 6.2 liter C7 Corvette engine. It's gonna produce a lot of heat, especially when you guys have the mid pipes, headers, long tubes. That starter lives where the header goes right past it. And what happens is over time the starter heats up and slowly gets killed. That's why you hear that dragging. People are trying to diagnose it. Your battery is good, your cables are good, but the starter has been killed from the heat of the header. So what we're going to do is we're going to put on a DEI starter wrap that's going to keep that starter cool no matter where it lives. And even if you guys aren't doing engine swaps, the Camaros, the Mopars, the Corvettes today, headers are very popular, and I'm seeing this in my shop all the time where the starters are getting killed from the heat of the header. We're going to first start by disconnecting the battery. We're going to go upstairs, we're going to take out the starter, we're going to go ahead and wrap it. You guys gotta love the GM starter. I love the way they put the bolts on the bottom. It makes it very easy for us to service, and it also makes it very easy for me to install my DEI starter heat wrap. Now, as you can see, I've got it installed. What I did was I took two of their straps, the metal straps, put them together so I can get around everything that I needed to get, because I went ahead and wrapped the transmission cooler lines and the two cables, the power cable and the starter signal wire, going to the starter so that I can protect everything at once. Now, it's not going to be the prettiest thing, but sometimes it doesn't have to be pretty. You're not going to see it from the top of the truck, and it's going to do the job that we want it to do. So when I look under here, I see that carbon fiber rack. I like it. I think it's pretty. And the thing is, it's going to protect. Those metal wraps, very easily installed. They're going to do the job of holding that in place. It's going to back up the Velcro that's already existing. This starter wrap is going to make sure that my starter lives throughout the life of this truck. If you guys know DEI Performance Products, then you know that they've been keeping our custom rides and street cars cool and quiet for years. One of their very popular products is a spark plug wire and boot protector. Now, today's cars, not a lot of them have spark plug wires because they don't have distributors, but the GM motors, the LTs, and the LS motors still have the spark plug boots that goes from the coil pack down to the spark plug. Now, from the factory, these cars come with spark plug protectors, the boot protectors that are metal. But when you do an engine swap and you've changed out the headers or manifold, then you don't, in some cases, have room for the metal protector. For instance, this is a perfect example. I've got an LT1 in this C10 pickup truck from a C7 Corvette, and my number 3 runner on the driver's side is actually touching the exhaust manifold. Now, this is an aftermarket header, and it's ceramic coated, but it still was able to melt that boot. Now, for me to protect it, I'm going to go ahead and install my DEI spark plug boot covers, and that's going to give me the protection that I had from the factory. making sure that my spark plug wires are going to stay living for a long period of time. Now, like I said, a lot of cars today don't have distributors or ignition wires, but you guys can use these items with battery cables, anything that's running along the exhaust down, or even under the engine bay where there is heat involved. For instance, my power wire right here, going by the manifold right there, I can very easily put one in that area, tie it in place, and where that manifold sits across that cable, it's going to stay protected. So if you guys want to make sure that your ride stays cool and quiet, make sure to check out DEI products.
Get ready as Sam and co-host Kevin Ford continue on the 1968 Buick Skylark project, replacing the fuel pump and tank, as well as installing new engine mounts.
So we're doing an LSX 454 engine swap in this Buick, and anytime you're doing something like an LS swap, you're going to make 400 horsepower. In our case, we're going to be making over 650. So you definitely need to replace the fuel system. In our case, we're going to replace the fuel tank along with all new lines. And since we're using a Holley Sniper EFI system, we're going to go ahead and use the entire Holley fuel system. It consists of a fuel injection tank with the module, and we've got the lines and the filter to complete this system. I've got Travis and Kevin with me. We've already disconnected the fuel lines and drained all the fuel. We've even sucked out the fuel from the tank to make it lighter for us. We went ahead and put lube on our threads because these are old bolts with a lot of road grime on them, so you don't want it to seize or break on you. That'll be a bear. Go ahead and put some lube on the threads. That way you can use your impact to get them out. You guys ready? So now that we've got the car pretty much gutted, we can start putting in our new parts. And the first thing we're going to do is replace the motor mounts with our new Holley swap mounts and get the engine prepped up to be installed in the engine bay. Now we got our fuel tank all ready to go. Now there is some prep work involved in this. The sending unit and the fuel pump needs to be measured and both cut to fit the tank, correct?
Yeah, I measured down from the flange to the bottom of the tank. We just cut the hoses, mount the fuel pump to the brackets and everything, and it goes in real easy.
Yeah, you want to make sure that sock goes as close as you can to the bottom of that tank, and you also want to make sure your float has a full sweep.
Right, and of course we index the bracket and the housing and all the stuff so that it matches the offset bolt pattern.
And you know, in our case, we're making over 650 horsepower. A baffled fuel tank is going to be very important because there are going to be times where we go out the hole really fast or we hit the brakes really fast, and that slosh, we don't ever want the pump to go dry. All right?
That's right.
Let's go ahead and put it up.
Nice to be able to reuse your
Now there may be times where you guys are working on these old cars and you're taking down these fuel tank straps, or even a newer car that maybe lives in the area where there is a lot of rust or salt. So you want to make sure that if you break a nut and bolt, you break the captured nut, you just replace it with hardware, it's okay. Okay? All right, now that we're done here, we're going to go ahead and R&R the motor mounts, getting ready for the engine to go in the hole. Now we're going to be installing the new motor mounts that we got from Holley. So first I'm going to go ahead and remove this existing motor mount. And the good thing is that this Buick actually has access holes to get to those hard bolts on the bottom.
All right, like we've done with a lot of the other hardware on this motor, we've chosen to upgrade to the ARP fasteners when it came to the motor mounts. We've got the cross bolts, but we've also got the bolts that mount the actual rubber mount. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw those on.
When we return, the long-awaited Hudson Hornet rebuild project will be back on Sam's Garage. Welcome back to Sam's Garage, presented by Brothers Truck Parts. Welcome back to Sam's Garage, where we have the long-awaited Hudson Hornet project. Sam, with the help of Doug Harris, prepares the engine to be reunited with the chassis.
So this is the cool part. It's a little bit scary too because this thing weighs so much and we got it on 2 3/8 bolts. And Doug had a good idea. We're using a big thick chain and this particular chain doesn't have anywhere for it to stay stationary on the hook of the engine mount. Doug, tell us why you put 2 bolts on.
Yeah, you want to have the bolts. When you get ready to slide a motor in, you want to make sure it doesn't slide on the chains for a safety factor. So if you go ahead and you slide the bolts in, it's not going to be able to go past the hook. So it's a real good preventive thing that you want to make sure that you do when you're getting ready to put an engine in and support it by chains.
And you know, we got the whole nose of this off. Mike from Lewis Rod and Customs was nice enough to keep the nose off for us. I went ahead and removed the radiator core support, giving us lots of room to be able to put this thing in there because this is all painted and nice. The last thing I want to do is hit anything and scrape something, create a scratch. Now, this is very heavy. We could hook up the transmission to the engine, but it's going to make it really heavy and I don't want the engine hoist to tip over, and we kind of need the length for us to be able to maneuver this in here. So we got a strap across the frame and we're going to strap that in to hold the back of the engine so when it drops down, that way we can go up in the air and put our transmission into the back of the engine.
So it's not uncommon in doing a build like this that you get to a certain spot, you have to think on your feet, do some stuff different, and it allows you to keep the build going forward. Otherwise, if you waited for the right part or something happens, if you can't do it, it'll really slow down the build process.
All right, Doug, here's your nut. Now, I don't want no laughing. Yes, we're using lug nuts. This is temporary. We couldn't find a 7/16 20 pitch nut anywhere around, so we're going to use these lug nuts until we get our build done.
I don't know, I think they look pretty good, Sam.
We don't want people making fun of us out there, you know what I mean?
I don't know, man, I like them.
So we're going to go ahead and put our nuts in place, and at this point, we can go ahead and tighten our bolts that are holding the motor mount to the chassis. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and strap it to the back. We're very close to the firewall. We're about 1 inch away from the firewall, so please, you got to be careful when doing something like this. So we're going to make sure our strap is good and stationary so the motor doesn't fall.
Right. Yeah, you know, and the question was asked to me, why do we have the strap in the back? You're only holding the engine up front, and so you're going to have to hold the back of the engine. If you didn't have a strap in place, then what happens is the nuts on the front is not enough to keep this engine from tilting all the way over. So it's real important that you run a strap in the back. The nice thing about a strap is you can ratchet it so you can bring it up or lower it down. It works extremely well for you guys.
And the last thing we want to do is compromise those brand new rubber mounts.
I know.
They can easily very well split in the middle.
You bet.
You know, Doug, having the nose off of this car made it really easy to get this big, heavy engine in place.
Oh, it did. This was fantastic the way it all worked out.
You know, the hardest part of this install really was the fact that we had to make sure not to scratch anything because this has been freshly painted, the chassis is painted, the firewall. There's only 1 inch air gap between the valve cover and the firewall itself. So the strap is working out perfect, everything is cool, it's bolted in, our lug nuts are holding it in place with a little bit of flash. Last thing I have to do is install my fan. And just like Doug said earlier, when you're doing something like this, there's going to be a lot of improvisation. I have 3 shims behind each one of these bolts holding the pulley in place because I had to align it, and the water pump, being a new water pump, just had a slightly different snout than the original one, and the original one was locked up.
Yeah, it's real important that you make sure the belt is always lined up. If it's slightly off, what'll happen is you're going to get a lot of wear on the belt, and the car is going to want to throw the belt. There's nothing worse than going down the road and all of a sudden losing your water pump because the belt's been thrown.
That's a good point too, because that's a V-belt, not very readily available in a lot of the stores, so you want to make sure that you do this properly so that you don't have a failure.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in. On this episode of Sam's Garage, we showed you products from DEI to help deal with heat from those hot exhaust parts. Kevin Ford's stainless steel header installation using ARP bolts on his 1968 Buick Skylark. And an update on the long-awaited Hudson Hornet project with Doug Harris.
Anywhere we want strength, we're using ARP hardware for the motor mounts and for brackets onto the engine and the motor mount through bolts. So here's your ARP fastener for your motor mount. Travis, go ahead and pump that thing up. Let's get it centered up and get this thing installed.
On the next episode of Sam's Garage, Sam Adavi and Kevin Ford will go more into depth on the Project Skylark's new engine installation.